Hey, it's Drybear. A new patch has launched for Path of Exile 2, targeting some of the frustrating aspects of Season 2, so hopefully the change that you've been looking forward to is in this one. Let's dive in. So it's not the longest patch in the world, but there's some pretty big things in here. The first one is going to be adding Respeccing of Ascendancy classes. So now you're able to respec your Ascendancy class. I actually thought this was already in from 2 days ago, but I haven't respected my Ascendancy yet, but it is in this patch here. So you'll be able to redo an Ascendancy trial, allowing you to respec which Ascendancy class you have chosen at the Ascension device, only if the trial would grant you the number of points you already have. So if you've done Ascendancy 2, you have to do Ascendancy 2 to respec. If you've done Ascendancy 3, you have to do Ascendancy 3 to respec. And I think this is kind of a blow to some people. I know there's like, I don't know what percentage it is. I doubt it's very high. It's probably like 10-20% of the audience, of the player base, but maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower. There are people that don't ever do their Ascendancy trials, and there's even some people that they do their Ascendancy 1 and 2, but they never do their Ascendancy 3 and 4, and if they need it, they just go and have someone run them through it for a certain amount of currency. So obviously, if you want to respec after doing Ascendancy 4, every Ascendancy gets harder and harder, which means it's going to get more and more time consuming, or I guess more difficult to respec your Ascendancy once it's done, but it's not something that bothers me in a very general sense. In order to respec your Ascendancy class, you must have 0 points allocated in it, but you can now talk to Bala Bala or the Trial Master to refund passive points. So while you're in the trial, you can go over to the NPC, you can say, hey, refund my points, it'll wipe them all out, and then you can go and do the respec, I'm guessing at the actual like the shrine that's there inside the end of the Ascendancy, so you actually do that as well. Keep in mind that Trials of Chaos that have 7 chambers and thus grants 4 Ascendancy passive points now can be attempted from level 55 down from 60, and Trials of Chaos that have 10 chambers, which will have the Trial Master in it, will grant up to 6 on it, can now be attempted from 65 down from 75. This is actually, I think, lower than Sekhmet in general. I believe Sekhmet is like 62, so they actually just lowered this down. Honestly, I feel like most people are not doing their 4-point Ascendancy at 55 or their 6-point Ascendancy at 65. I feel like most people are doing it much higher, but it means if you have a very strong build, you're playing meta and you're building for that, and you know what you're doing, you can much quicker gain access to those points through the Trial of Chaos. And in general, Trial of Chaos, in my experience, is much harder, except for the 4th Ascendancy of Sekhmet, with that final boss being a huge challenge. Next up is Charm Changes, and this has been a major point of contention for people in the game because there are lots of things in the game, heavy freezes, some insanely high damage bursts from certain elements like Arbiter Bash with fire, or potentially with chaos damage in some of the fights as well. And a lot of people have complained about the fact that for the most part, in most average builds, you're really only going to have 1 or 2 charm slots. It's actually quite rare for people to normally have 3, and so there have been a lot of discussions on charm slots just not being enough, charms having too long of a cooldown, and charms which are meant to be our modification system for guarding ourselves against negative effects like too much poison damage, too much bleed damage, being hard frozen or hard stunned, which is the most egregious. Being able to counter those things based on our build has been kind of limited based on the charm system. So they are finally implementing new charm changes. Belts level 30 and above will now have implicit modifiers that with 1 to 2 charm slots on them. Belts above 60, level 60, will now have implicit modifiers that go up to 1, 2, 3. And I've tested this morning after the patch went live, and a lot of the 60 plus belts I'm getting have had 2 or 3 charm slots. And keep in mind, this only affects belts that are found after the patch. That's the drop, and these will be implicit modifiers, so you're not going to be able to mess with them really. The explicit modifiers for additional charm slots can no longer roll, as those are being moved over into implicit. It just means that, you're not going to be having to sacrifice a roll on an item in order to get the extra charm slots. It's now built into the belt itself. And of course, they have mentioned that there will be more ways to get charm slots. We know that like Ranger has ways to do charm slots, and Huntress has ways to do charm slots. So getting more of those, I think, is going to be a big part of the gearing process, or like the flavor for specific classes. The Zerfal's Genesis and Ingenuity belts no longer have additional charm slot modifiers, though existing existing versions of the items are not affected. So if you have a legacy one or an existing, like Ingenuity is a big one. If you have an Ingenuity now, it'll stay the same, but new ones will just have those slots without having to sacrifice a roll on the stat as well. Bullshaborn has intentionally kept its additional charm slots for now, as in the future, we'll be expanding the maximum possible charm slots to 6. So they say that the ultimate maximum, which is not going to be common, but the ultimate maximum from charm slots is going to be 6. I would say if you have 4 or 5 charms, then you're going to have some pretty serious uptime, especially if you have charge recovery and things like that. So this makes the charm system a lot more robust and a lot more interesting to use from that standpoint. Massively increase the values on prefixes that restore life, mana, or grant guard when charms are used. Kind of hilarious. Some of the charms would be like, when the charm that has 1 charge or has 1 use procs occasionally every 20 minutes, it will give you 4 HP. It may as well just not have a proc at all, because that's absolutely nothing by the time you're using charms effectively, so that's going to be a big thing there. You can update these values if you want to waste a Divine Orb on it, or you can just get a new belt, which is probably more reasonable. All charms but the Golden Charm have had their maximum charges halved and their charges per use halved, making them refill more quickly. This means you don't necessarily need to have the charge recharge or the like charge per second on it, but even so, that'll be much more impactful now, which means that not only are we getting more charms that we can use regularly in more builds, it also means that you can be able to recharge those charges faster and more consistently, which means the uptime overall is going to get better from 2 different directions. They've also changed the base duration of Stone Charm to be increased from 2.5 seconds to 3 seconds to be a little bit longer, which is a nice change. Next, some changes to the stash tabs. We haven't added any new like tabs we can get. Like, we desperately need a rune tab. We get so many runes now, which is actually in this patch that we'll talk about in just a second, and just some, you know, improvement for some of the things that don't end up going, like some of the expedition stuff, things like that really need to have a place to go. What they've done with this specifically is they've added stash tab affinities for the following categories: socketables, which is going to include your chaos versions as well as your runes and things like that, fragments for tablets, trial keys, breach, expedition, and ritual. So you can jump in game. Like I said, there's not like a tab that's dedicated to it. Like, it's not going to be like a map tab or a currency tab that you can play around with. It is just going to be an infinity. So what you can do actually is you can set this up and just set this to be when I send something to my base, like to my stash, I want it to, if it's one of these types, make it go to this tab specifically. So you can do things like socketables. So like if you're looking for, like, for example, your soul cores and things like that, or you're looking for your runes, you can send those to a specific tab. I kind of already do this anyway, even though I'm late on starting the season. I still already do this for everything anyways. I just kind of load these in here. So if you're looking for those, you can certainly have them, and it just makes it easier. So now if you want to put all your ritual stuff in one spot, all your expedition stuff in one spot, it means you'll have to have a separate tab for each. So if you have lots of extra tabs, it works great. But now having these, I think, is going to be a really big boon until they can actually get like some reasonable, like actual tabs that we can use as part of that'll help sort it even better. Next, they added a handy dandy notebook bookmarking system for the Atlas, which isn't really a huge deal when you first open the Atlas, but as you start exploring it more and more and getting further out, because it is an endless map that sprawls on forever, you know, if you're going on your 3rd or 4th or 5th or 10th Arbiter of Ash run, where you have to keep flying back to the Burning Monolith over and over, it gets kind of annoying to navigate. So they added in a bookmarking system that allows you to navigate the Atlas easier, and by default, the Burning Monolith and home, like the start point of the Atlas, are all bookmarked or default. So when you're on a node, you can right-click the node on PC. I'm not sure what this is on console, but you'll be able to create a bookmark and set an icon and a name. You can have up to 16 bookmarks at once. They will appear as icons around the map as you normally would, and you can navigate, or you can look at the list of bookmarks and navigate that way. So if we start out on the Atlas here, you'll notice that there is now a cool bookmarking button up here in the top left. You can bring this up and you can actually see where certain things are. By default, these are set and fixed, which means you can go to where your player is, you can go to where the start point is, and you can go to the Burning Monolith as well, which is going to be your final boss there. So you can actually have that set up. But you can also have 16 additional ones. So if you go to a node, say there's a node that you really like, you want to hold on to, you can just set this up, you can give it an icon and save it. And then if you wanted to, like say we were over here, we can go to our new awesome bookmark Azdazd, which teleports us over to it, and we can navigate and use it as well, which is pretty cool. It's just super useful for finding citadels and keeping track of things, or if you just set up like some unique maps, or maybe you don't have all the hideouts done yet and you want to grab these, you can set up some nice little hot fixes or like hotkeys to travel around, which I think is going to make this a lot easier to navigate, especially as you go later in the game and your map gets bigger and bigger. Next, they tackle a huge point of contention for the community right now, which is the severity of being punished for the end game, and also how many attempts you get at something. So when the game first launched, you would have no revives. You would get one chance at a pinnacle boss or at a specific map in some cases, and a lot of people complained that they really had no way of practicing or preparing, right? And so the criticism was that if you only get one life on a pinnacle boss and you've never fought the pinnacle boss before, you're just not going to do the fight until you're so unbelievably over prepared for it that you just like blow right through it, because you don't want to risk losing that attempt. So their first triage for this problem is they added revives for specifically Arbiter Ash and potentially even for future bosses in the future. And then with this patch today, they made it so that pinnacle bosses have unlimited respawn attempts at difficulty 0, which means that if you're not doing Arbiter of Ash 4 or Zesh 4, if you're doing the very first one, difficulty 0, the one you first unlock, you can respawn as many times as you want. Now, you can't like leave, change your build, and then come back. You'll have to farm a new attempt there. But if inside the single attempt, if it's at level 0, the initial difficulty, you can do it over and over and over, which allows people to practice the fight, see the mechanics, which on some of them is very important. Most notably the Arbiter of Ash, which has some crazy one-shot mechanics that if you've never seen them before, the likelihood of you surviving them is almost 0. You have to see them to see how they plant, and also when they start overlapping randomly at different times, you have to be prepared for that. So at difficulty 0, the pinnacle bosses now will allow you to respawn infinitely. I'm guessing this works in party play as well, which is a huge boon for people that are trying to learn the pinnacle boss fights. Tower and hideout maps now have a higher minimum number of rares that can spawn. The final rare monster defeated in tower and hideout maps will now drop a map of the same tier. Defeating the final rare monster in tower maps is still not required to complete a tower map, so that's nice. That means you can just go to the precursor beacon and light it up. And then for the hideout maps, they're gonna have more rares on them. In general, I personally didn't feel like the hideout maps were all that consequential. Like, they felt fine to me as is, but now you can at least get more drops from them, and you're probably a little bit more encouraged to use higher, more valuable waystones in the hideout maps as well. They also added UI tracking for rare and unique monsters in unique maps, tower maps, and hideout maps. In normal maps, you can see on my footage up there in the top right corner, there's the rares are always on screen for normal maps. However, for hideout maps and tower maps, since they aren't the end objective, they're not there. There's no targeter for it. There's no icon for it. So I think that this being added is going to be a nice touch. And I also really hope that going forward, if they decide to keep these rogue exiles thing, I really hope that they end up adding either a map icon or some kind of highlight for them, or both, because I lose track of the rogue exiles all the time. I see the health bar appear and I spend like 15 seconds looking for them because I have no idea where they are. They're so hard to see. Next is crafting changes. As each new rune tier is unlocked, we are removing the lower ones from the drop pool. This is to stop you from getting spammed with lesser runes at higher levels. So you get runes constantly, and you get the weaker ones too. I think this is the right way to go about it. It kind of reminds me of Diablo, where they were still dropping like blue and yellow items at the very end of the game that you really would never use, like in season 1, season 2, and they decided to just cut them out of the loot pool over time, because no one likes getting loot that's absolutely worthless, that has no purpose. So lesser runes no longer drop past level 31. The medium runes no longer drop past level 52, and overall past level 52 you will now get more greater runes than currently, but lesser and regular will no longer drop, which means if you get a rune drop on the ground in your past level 52, it's always going to be a greater at the highest efficacy, which is great there. Imagine if we had multiple tiers of the soul cores and stuff, and you kept getting the worst ones possible when you did get them. Rogue exiles now always have appropriate tier runes socketed to dropped items relative to their item levels, and scepters can now have sockets. We've added a new talisman modifiers for scepters to allow upgrades to your minions at mid to late game, which is actually quite huge. They just did this for the wands and staves, and now we have it for scepters, which is another option for minion builds and really just any build using a scepter in general. Next, some much needed totem changes. All totem skills now start gaining elemental resistance and most importantly chaos resistance as well, scaling up with the skill level from starting at level 13 up to level 20. They'll have plus 75% elemental resist and 35% chaos resist, which is a great number by level 20. Now, level 20 does take a long time to get, but even then, this is kind of what you'd expect like entry-level endgame for players to have as far as survivability goes. So having this on totems is big. Ironwood support now also grants totems summoned by supported skills 10% maximum elemental resistance. The big problem here for totem builds, whether you're doing ballista or you're doing like warrior totems, is just they would just end up getting, because they're stationary minions and you can't control with, like once they're put down, you can't, like you have to resummon them to reposition them. A lot of times they would be stuck in some AoE like a flame wall or an ice patch, or they're in a poison cloud, and then they would just die and you have to keep resummoning them over and over, which some builds struggle to deal with. Not to mention, if you've ever done a totem build, a lot of the totem options are very limited in the tree as far as like you have your totem options up here, you have your totem options here, and there's even some totem options up here by like the Templar side of the tree, which it makes it very difficult for some builds to go towards. There just isn't that much survivability built into the tree, and rather than just adding more, they're just adding it into the skill by default, which I think is a good solution. Next up is light stun changes. This has been probably my #1 issue with the game right now, is just the sheer amount of stun damage that enemies do, even if they're like a fruit fly that flew in because it smelled some chicken in the dungeon and happened to be part of the fight. If the fly flies by your face, the wing gust from the fruit fly will mini stun and stagger your character. It's ridiculous in some cases, and it makes a lot of builds have to run a significant amount of stun threshold to deal with. So they've made some changes. I'm so glad that they were making these changes here. Again, it was my #1 gripe with the game from the beginning, is just how much overuse of light stun and mini stun the game had. So they moderately reduced the capacity for monsters to light stun you, especially towards cruel and endgame, by lowering the amount of stun damage they deal, which means that it's easier to get over their stun threshold to avoid it. They also increased the minimum they must deal to light stun you, so that threshold has gone up a little bit. Elemental, chaos, and range stun damage has been penalized even further, so you're less likely to get stunned by random stray projectiles and other things of the sort. These changes don't affect the mini stuns and staggers that players will deal through light stuns. Super big on the projectiles, especially if you get a map that has like, monsters fire 2 additional projectiles and you get a room with those quill beasts or a whole bunch of skeletal archers. There's so many projectiles flying all over the place, and if you're constantly being mini stunned, you can actually get stun locked in some cases, which just feels like a really cheap way to add difficulty. I've never, in a game where there's like 1 or 2 monsters on screen in a Souls-like game, like Lies of P or Elden Ring or Dark Souls or something, I can totally see being punished for being hit. And some of the monsters, like the one you see on screen, if I get hit with a tree log, I would expect to have some kind of recoil from that. But if I'm being whacked on by an ant in the desert, I really don't think that it should be mini stunning me every time it hits me. And also, I shouldn't feel like every build should be forced to run stun threshold just to survive the stun lock and mini stun. So I'm so glad they made this change. That's big. We've also added a cluster to the passive tree near Chaos Inoculation that allows you to invest into a heavy amount of stun and ailment threshold based on your energy shield. We'll be adding more stun mitigation later around the tree, notably in the dexterous section, which is a big thing too, because you have some stun threshold here. You also have stun threshold for some things, like if you're at max life or things like that, you can get some over here. You can even stun threshold while parrying or blocking, but a lot of the stun threshold is over here on the strength side of the tree or up here. They actually do have some of the stun threshold from energy shield up here as well, which is pretty big, but really there just isn't much here, and I'm actually concerned there's not much over here as well, especially if they're going to be requiring it. The change to mini stuns and the stun thresholds is going to be really big for builds that don't necessarily have those as an option, but having more stun threshold in the tree as well as less requirement for it, I think think is better for the game overall. Next up is player changes. They're doing another round of buffs for Shard Scavenger. It will now restore 1 cooldown use for all your grenades and grant a buff for 2 seconds that prevents your crossbow attacks from consuming bolts. So not only do we have a grenade option, but we also have a way to use this for that, which means that it's gonna be super awesome for the low bolt count abilities that you can use this with, which is super strong, and I think this is gonna be a nice change for Shard Scavenger overall. Shockwave Totem's base attack time is now cut in half. It used to be 3 seconds, it's now 1.5. Additionally, the Slam now deals 211% top-end attack damage, down from 369, because obviously if it attacks faster, it would just be a straight damage buff if they did that. So they're making it attack twice as fast, and they cut down just above half for the damage scaling on that, and while Jagged Ground Eruption damage is unchanged. So your Jagged Ground Eruption trigger interaction is still going to be fine, but the damage is going to be a little bit more hit for the attack rate. Which, apologies for the flashbang, but just to run the simulation, if you had maxed out damage with the attack time, it is actually, before it was it's not equivalent. It actually is slightly more, which means it is a buff for DPS throughput on the Shockwave Totem just on its normal attack. So it will attack twice as fast and did not lose half its damage. It's a little bit more. So it is actually overall a throughput increase while also having a faster attack, which should make it more usable as well, which means you have, when you miss an attack, it's far less punishing. Next, Frozen Locust can now be used while using other skills to interrupt what you're doing, which is pretty similar to how they handle the evasive maneuver for Huntress, where it kind of just flows with other abilities, which I think is a good change. Maybe they just needed to add tech for this, and now that they have it, they're using it retroactively on some other things as well. You will now shield bash if you release Ray's shield after blocking a hit from a faraway attacker, if there's a different enemy in shield bash range. This is super cool. I wish they did this for parry, but just having this for shield I think is a nice game. Stormlance is able to be supported by ground effects. Ray's shield is now able to be supported by concentrated effect. Fire exposure and lightning exposure supports have had their wording adjusted to make it clear that their effects apply to any target that it's being applied to, which is nice. Whirlwind Lance and the Whirlwind keyword hover now clarify that the Whirlwind's collapse deals melee damage. Improve the visual effect of Ark's explosions on hitting a shock target. This is the new effect they added with Season 2. And Glacial Lance is now able to chain off terrain, which is crazy. That means that we can have more Glacial Lance builds and potentially even reach the level of a Lightning Lance, the Lightning Spear that bounces off of everything. Now we're gonna have Glacial Spear. Let's go. Next up, improvements and other changes. They added an equipped gems section in the gem cutting interface to make leveling up cross-class skill gems more convenient. This was actually discussed in the interview with Zizarin last week and was just like an idea like, oh, that's actually a great idea. We should just do that. And then they did a week later. So awesome for that. Rarity borders items available to purchase from vendors. Usually people, like, well, at least for me, what I do is I just search the vendor for the word rare and I look at the rares that way. But now you can see it as a border, which makes it a lot easier. Hopefully this shows up on rituals as well, because I feel like that's the one that I need to see the higher rarity the most. Raider Rune of Tithing now provides 1 to 100 lightning thorns damage from 1 to 10, which is basically nothing. Attribute runes now have more appropriate gold value to vendors and can be reforged into their higher tiers, which is great. And of course we have the runes that won't drop at the lower tiers anymore as well. Breach hands can now drop splinters at all levels. This is a huge win. It starts low and increases with area level, and shrines are now easier to click on. There's so many times where I've literally spent like 5 seconds straight trying to click on a shrine and just can't. You basically need to kill everything in the area before doing it. It is a little bit better since the patch, but still kind of wonky, and I still feel like you have to kill everyone in the area in order to click on the shrine. Next, for monster changes, some endgame monsters can no longer interrupt their attacks if you move too far out of range during the attack to relentlessly chase you. This is something that they changed in the patch last week, the end of last week, but they did another change of this here. Effectively, all the monsters, especially the ones that were hasted, but all the monsters had a way to animation cancel their attacks to keep up with you. Very common in other games to be able to cancel those animations and move, and mobs were just doing it by default, like actually systematically, procedurally, they were animation canceling. So now a lot lot less of them are doing it, though there might still be issues. Zarok the Temporal no longer aggressively targets player minions if any are present. That's going to help minion builds with that Ascendancy. The Mirror to Fury is now less likely to target minions. Again, going to help a lot with that as well. Azak Brutes, Maulers, Stalkers, Volguards have the frequency they use their skills, such as Ground Slams, reduced, and the cooldowns increased. This is big. There's far more mobs than just these that have this as a problem, like jumping birds, slams, knockdowns, especially when you get a pack of like 8 of them and they're all just spamming those slammed knockdowns over and over and over. It gets to the point where unless you're playing a screen wipe build, it becomes impossible to deal with them, or you just have to run away and slowly chip away at them because they're spamming their abilities so much, and if they're hasted, good luck trying to get away from them. So this is a big change, and I think they should continue down this path. You know, don't overdo it, but just make sure that these things get changed. Adjust the behavior of the 180-degree cleave skill used by Geonor to prevent them using the skill multiple times subsequently. I had this issue actually on Cruel, like a recent Cruel clear. I had Geonor use that big turnaround swipe attack. He used it 4 times in a row, and it almost killed me. And it's near instantaneous. It's very hard to avoid if you're in melee range and he's using it. The composition of monster packs in the Sanctum, Agarat, Utsal have been adjusted to reduce the amount of ranged skills being hurled at the player at these areas. The same adjustment for map areas that are similar. This is another nice cleanup for the game. If they keep doing stuff like this, it's going to keep feeling better and better. Adjust the frequency and damage of the Ice Shard Spiral Volley from Shrines. Adjust the behavior of the Venomous Crabs and Crab Matriarchs and Constricted Spitters. Vol Form Shifters now has less damage reduction when in shape-shifted form. The Fettered Spider Cleansed Monster now explodes on death less often. Adjust the damage of Goliath and Vol Goliath. Adjust the damage of Stone Sentinel Slam. Reduce the damage of Essence of the Infinite Monster modifier. Reduce the damage of Vol Enforcer to be more appropriate for how many times it hits. Lower the damage on the Reconstructor's Lightning Burst skill. And slightly reduce the damage of Ravenous Misshapen Arcs skill. I also think that the experimenters, whatever they're called in the Vol area, like the Vol Fortress, they spam way too much, and I hope to see some of these changes go towards them as well. So you're in these Vol areas and you get these experimenters that just spam lightning orbs everywhere, especially if you have the extra projectiles affix. They can fill the entire screen with lightning and they're just constantly summoning them, which is kind of annoying. I feel like they also need an adjustment for that. And lastly, a whole bunch of bug fixes that went into the game that help address a ton of issues. There's still a lot more, and honestly, I think the biggest thing that should be on their docket right now is client stability, server stability, and lag issues. I think there's tons of latency issues that came online with the Season 2 update. There's also a whole bunch of like performance issues. I crash basically 3-4 times a day now. The game just closes. There's no error message. It just closes the desktop and I gotta start over. There's tons of disconnects, especially if you're playing in the EU region. Some of those disconnects are resulting in rollbacks. Like, there are people that are losing, you know, anywhere from 5 minutes to, in some cases, almost an hour's worth of progress because they DC. So hopefully more of those start working their way into the fix-up. A ton of those things just need to be cleaned up, just performance-wise. There are some in here. You can see there's instance crashes, client crashes, some other bugs and stability issues, and a whole bunch of gameplay things, which I'll leave on screen for you to read if you want to pause the video and look at that there. So that's the patch that just went live in the game. Let me know what you think about the changes here. I, for one, am very glad for the mini stun changes, some of the changes to totem builds that desperately needed it, and some quality of life for some of the animations. I think they're moving in the right direction, and if they keep making patches like this, hopefully things will start to feel better towards the middle part of Season 2 for a lot of people. And if not, you know, I think Season 3 is still going to be good. I think PoE is still an awesome game, but there's obviously a lot of things that they need to address now that they're kind of moving into that normal patch cycle. Let me know what you think about this state down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.